G'day folks, Scott here. Today I'm talking about The Shining. The Shining is one of my favourite Stephen King stories. I haven't read the book since I was a teenager when I first started reading horror novels, and I recently just finished listening to the audiobook on Audible. I signed up to Audible last year. I'd been, recommended to me by friends. I was a bit dubious about it, but man, I've really enjoyed listening to books. I've really enjoyed just having something read to me again, which hasn't happened since I was a kid. And The Shining was fantastic. But it's the first time I've revisited the book since I first read it when I was young. And as a result, watching the movie so much over the years and never revisiting the book, the differences between them sort of blurred as time went on. So I really wanted to talk today about the differences between primarily the movie, which I love, that came out in 1980, and then the miniseries that came out in 1997. So having just done the book, watched the movie, and watched the miniseries again, I just wanted to sort of talk about it while it's fresh in my mind. Now, it's publicly known that Stephen King doesn't like Stanley Kubrick's movie. I was always a little baffled by this, only because it was quite some time after I read the book that I saw the movie. So the differences between them were, sort of aged a little. And I was always a bit amazed that he sort of hated such a successful, loved movie. And then, the miniseries came out in 97, and we watched that. And, that being produced by Stephen King, a teleplay based on the book by Stephen King, like he was even in it, as a cameo. So this was something he was really involved in, and he was clearly passionate about. And it's much more akin to the book than the movie was. But there's things I love about both of them, and I feel that it's one of those very difficult to choose kind of scenarios. Having just gone back and done them all, especially, I guess the one thing with Kubrick's movie is it's just simply gorgeous to look at. It's so well shot. It's so thoughtfully crafted. The Overlook is just glorious in it. It's such a beautiful environment. Being a 70s kid, I love the 70s decor and color palettes and carpets and textures and the woolen ties they were wearing during the interview in Ullman's office, and all these things that, just are entrenched in my childhood that, I obviously adore. So I'm going to try and go over some key things here that I really think are the primary differences between them and sort of why I do and don't like either version. So I guess, primarily let's start with Jack. Obviously played by Jack Nicholson in the movie and played by Steven Weber in the miniseries. I've got to say that Steven Weber's Jack Torrance is much closer to the one in the book. My problem with Jack Nicholson's performance in that film is there's not a lot of development going from, writer husband to crazy murdering lunatic. And I think that was a big part of the character. A big part of the book and the miniseries was obviously, Jack as a character had his demons. He was raised in an abusive household. He was an alcoholic, then recovering alcoholic. The book and the miniseries I found differed, which was a little odd. I found that in the chronological order of things in the book, he'd barely holding together his job, heavily drinking, came home one day, Danny, the son, had messed up his play and spread it all around the room, and he'd yanked him up by the arm to give him a smack, broken his arm, quit drinking. 5 months later or so, there'd been an incident where a teenager, a spoiled preppy kid at his school, he'd had to kick from the debating team, and this kid took to his tires with a knife and, damaged his car, and he beat the shit out of him and got fired. And that led to this sort of last chance, this job that his friend, who was, on the board of directors for the Overlook Hotel, got him this job as the caretaker. That's primarily the way it goes in the miniseries, except for the fact that for some reason they mixed things up where he beat up the student whilst he was drunk and then quit drinking, had a relapse, broke his kid's arm, I think dislocated, they said in the miniseries, and then got the job after that. I prefer the books thing with the fact that he'd been dry and his temper had still come out, as opposed to the alcohol being completely associated with it. I liked the danger potentially being there regardless of whether the drink was involved or not. The drink was just a catalyst to make it worse. The problem with me with Jack in the movie is that although these things come up between Wendy and the doctor in the discussion in the house at the beginning of the movie, it doesn't, obviously develop it as heavily. But Jack's a prick right from the beginning. He's very smug in the office, even with Ullman during the interview for the job in the hotel. in the drive up in the car when they're going to this job, and he sounds very short, very annoyed, very just on edge with his family already. And they never really developed the fact that both in the book and the miniseries, although he was abusive and he had his demons and had his problems, he and his son Danny had a very strong relationship, and Danny adored his father. He adored his son, as just his demons got the better of him repeatedly. And that just doesn't come off in the movie at all. The tension is there before they get there, and the Overlook just pushes them over the edge. That's, really, I guess, my primary complaint with the film. I know there's a lot of stuff where it differs, like, for example, in the book and the miniseries, the hedge animals and the topiary were a really big part of it, and they were repeatedly a part of it, especially in the book right up to the end, to the escape from the hotel. Whereas, there's no hedge animals really in that capacity in it at all, and they're really substituted by the maze. The Overlook Hotel in the miniseries, I believe, is a real hotel, not called the Stanley, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's still there now. It's a really beautiful place, and it was very well, chosen for the miniseries because it had, the playground and a few features like the miniature version of the Overlook in the playground, and some elements that were much more true to the book. The problem being, from my eyes, that place, it clearly doesn't snow there because everything was fake snow and computer generated snow, and whereas in the Kubrick film, when it was snowing, it really looked like it was snowing, and it really looked like they were there. And that obviously, to be fair, this is a big production movie with a big director who would have had quite a lot of money put at it versus a television show. The benefit of the miniseries is it goes for 4.5 hours, so it really gets to develop the story and to go through a lot of the key story points, whereas the movie had to condense a lot of that stuff down. I'm certainly not bagging out the movie. Like, I love that film. Like I said earlier, I love the way it looks. I love the way it's shot. I love the sound design, the music, the performances. I just think that Jack could have had a bit more of an arc, going from, someone who could be believed as like this loving father to go to what he becomes at the end, as opposed to, like I said earlier, really seeming like he already hates his family, and this is just a push over the edge. The other key elements they really kept to, similar was obviously the room 237 or 217, depending on whether it's the book or the movie. But, really what happens in there is pretty much the same in relation to Danny, in relation to that Wendy immediately blames Jack for the damage when they see him due to the things in the past. The cool thing is obviously in the book and the miniseries when Danny's like, it was her, talking about the woman that he'd seen in this room, that gave Jack a chance to gloat against Wendy and see how it feels when someone blames you for something you didn't do. The primary difference, which I've never been a huge fan of, is obviously, again with Jack, this is only maybe halfway through the movie when this happens, when he goes up to investigate that room, and it doesn't go down the path where Danny had stolen the key and snuck in there and already been caught once and already got into trouble once and was really pushing his father's buttons as far as not listening to him and all, and that feeding back to the domestic abuse he'd suffered at the hands of his own father. In the movie, the door's just open with a key in there, and it's never really said whether Danny did that or not. He just comes along, the room is open, he goes in there, he sees a moldy old dead woman in the bath, she follows him through the room, strangles him just like in the book. The difference being when Jack goes back to investigate the room, in the book, he goes in, there's nothing in the bathroom, he's leaving, he hears something, he goes back, she's in the bath, he freaks out, runs away, pretends it never happened. Whereas in the movie, this really beautiful naked woman gets out of the bath, and he seriously starts making out with her, and it's not until he turns around and sees her in the mirror that she's the moldy old lady that he freaks out and leaves. And that's always been a little weird to me, in the fact that his son had just been assaulted, and his wife is terrified. He's just been accused of doing it. He's going up there to vindicate himself and try and find proof that it wasn't him that he did it. And he sees some naked chick in a hotel. She shouldn't be there. Even if she's real, she's trespassing. She's just assaulted his son, and his idea is to then, essentially go to have sex with her before he realizes she's dead and moldy and leaves. And I've always found that kind of weird. Apart from that, everything else in that film I really, really like. I just really, think that there's elements that are stronger in both of them. The weakest part of me, unfortunately, for the miniseries is Danny. I really think Steven Weber and Rebecca De Mornay did a fantastic job as Jack and Wendy. But the kid who plays Danny is just awful. Like, he's really not great at it. The kid who played Danny in the movie was really good. He did a pretty dramatic performance and did a fantastic job of it. Whereas the one and the other one, I just can't stand the look of him. You know, he has this huge buck teeth and this weird top lip, and his mouth is always open. He never closes it. He's like a fly trap. He's got this horrendous bowl haircut, and his just acting is pretty dismal throughout it. And he's the weakest link, you know, like watching it again, like sitting through it, he was the reason I was struggling to get through it. Like Wendy and Jack were fantastic. I think the miniseries did a much better job of conveying Danny's visions and his interactions with Tony, the invisible friend who warns him of, you know, the things that are going to happen in the Overlook. Although in Kubrick's movie, I love the imagery of it, the blood rushing out of the elevator, you know, all that is fantastic. The red rum and him adding the axe murder and the dead daughters and, you know, join us, Danny, and those kids are great. Whereas in the miniseries, when they're talking about the previous caretaker, Grady, it just said he was there on his own and killed himself instead of having killed his family and himself like in the book and the movie. But, you know, the Danny his visions were more accurate in the miniseries. You know, Tony, obviously, in the miniseries is a grown-up, whereas in the book, he was always so far in the distance, Danny could never really see him. He was always talking from far away. And in the film, he's just basically represented by Danny's finger, and Danny refers to Tony as a boy who lives in his mouth, who hides in his stomach, you know, and you know, in the miniseries, like it turns out in the epilogue that Tony was Danny in the future, kind of talking back to himself, and that's a big change from the end of the book, and one I wasn't a big fan of, to be honest. But you know, I still, you know, appreciated it. I just find, you know, if we're talking about the ending, really, the book is my favorite. Probably then followed by the movie, then by the miniseries. The book is insane. You know, when Jack is chasing Danny through the house, and these go back to those visions that Tony had been showing Danny throughout the book and the miniseries to a degree, was of this shadowy, deep-voiced, booming figure smashing walls with the mallet. You know, the mallet wasn't really even a part of the movie. Jack Nicholson's, you know, version of it used the axe, but the visionary and you know, you'll remember what he forgot line and all that kind of stuff was, you know, true in both the book and the miniseries. But the confrontation, obviously, at the end when, you know, Jack and Danny were up on the third floor, in the book, just, you know, Jack beating his own face off with the mallet to, you know, as a thing to unmask himself and trying to remove the last vestiges of this child's father to really sort of drive home that he'd won. You know, that's a fantastic ending and really brilliant imagery, which just didn't, you know, obviously couldn't come to light in a miniseries due to the level of violence and probably lack of money for special effects. And they didn't go down that path at all. There wasn't a confrontation between Danny and Jack really in the house. It took place in the hedge. And even then it wasn't really a confrontation, it was a chase. You know, but then the actual ending, you know, like Nicholson's character dying in the snow was fine, and I like all that, but the Overlook, you know, just everything moved on from there, and it was kind of just this, like, you know, no closure on the ending, so to speak. Whereas the miniseries, like I said, you know, that goes down a different path to the book, where after the fact, the hotel's blown up, they escape. Dick Halloran lives in the book and he lives in the miniseries, whereas obviously he dies with an axe wound in the chest in the movie. And in the miniseries, like, it then cuts forward, I think, 10 years to a graduation at Stonehaven, I think it was called, the Stovington, perhaps, the prep school where Jack had actually taught in the book, and there's obviously a cameo throwback, like, you know, Easter egg to the book. They chose that to be the school Danny had gone to in the miniseries. And basically, Danny growing up is the vision that we saw of Tony as when Danny was a child, and, you know, Wendy and Dick are there, and it sort of closes that way. I much prefer the ending in the book with, you know, Wendy still horrifically damaged from all the wounding from the croquet mallet thing. You know, wearing a back brace, and then being, you know, out in the woods at this lovely little resort where Dick is working now, and then the conversation between Dick and Danny, like on the jetty as Danny's fishing at the end. I think that gave me a lot more closure as far as the story was concerned, and I liked more of the mystery with the fact that Tony remained unexplained as opposed to being wrapped up in the miniseries the way he was. So, yeah, that's probably my primary thing is, if I have to choose between all of them, the book's going to win probably then followed by the movie, then by the miniseries, but I've got to give credit to the miniseries for the fact that it's so much closer to the book for the most part. Now, a lot of the people I talk to have never even heard of the miniseries, so if you haven't seen it, it came out in '97. It was directed by Mick Garris, who did a whole bunch of Stephen King TV adaptations. Like I said, the screenplay or teleplay was written by Stephen King. It's worth a look. I'm sure you could pick it up cheap on DVD, or maybe it's on your cable network or streaming service. But it's worth a look. But it just can't compete with the visionary genius of Kubrick and just how beautifully shot the movie is. So I think that's all I've really got to say is, I love all three of them for different reasons, but the book really, just having gone through it, just really revitalized my love for that story. So the book was 75, the movie was 80, the miniseries was 77, sorry, the book came out. So if you've never read the book, please do. Especially if you're a fan of the movie and you've never read the book, do yourself a favor and read that book. If you're not big into reading, try Audible. Give it a listen. It might change your life. There's a whole bunch of amazing Stephen King work that never got very good adaptations when it came to film or television, and the books are where it's at. So that's all I've got to really say about it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't. I'm probably going to do some more retro reviews of things, from my past coming up pretty soon. And as always, thanks for watching.